friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. I have just a quick word of warning for you today in the canning arena. There is some common canning advice that is good canning advice, but it unfortunately can cosmetically damage a very popular style of canner, and that is the Presto digital pressure canner. Now don't worry, I still use mine, love mine, use it on a regular basis. It does not alter the function of the canner, but it does cosmetically damage it. That common canning advice is to put a splash of vinegar in your canning water to help prevent hard water cloudiness on your jars. I live on a well. I have very hard water. I have always, as whenever I remember, I have always put a splash of vinegar in my canner water to keep my jars nice and clear. Unfortunately, vinegar, as you can see, will eat away at the lining of the inside of this pressure canner pot for the Presto digital pressure canner. Like I said, this does not interfere with the safety ability of the canner to pressure can safely. It doesn't interfere with the ability of its function. But as you can see, it doesn't look very nice, and when I am spending, $200, $250 or whatever dollars on something, I expect it to be quality. So I'm a little bit disappointed at the liner kind of coming off like that, but it was user error, really. Canning water is not, they designed this canner to hold water, which is what canners are supposed to hold, not to necessarily hold an acidic solution like vinegar. So I can kind of understand that situation. But I wanted to let you know that if you have this canner, don't put a splash of vinegar in it. However, now that mine has already happened, I'm still putting vinegar in it, to be completely honest with you. I'm just letting you know what I'm doing in my kitchen. I really want my jars to stay nice and clear, and because I live on a well with such hard water, my jars can get extremely cloudy fast. And since I know that this does not alter the safety function of the canner, and since it's already messed up, I'm not concerned about messing it up any further. It's been like this for quite a while now, and so I choose to still put vinegar in it. But I know that if you have this canner and you have not used vinegar and it still has that good, nice finish on it, I wanted to pass along that word of warning for you. Now, I also want to very quickly address two common questions that we receive in emails a lot of. And to be honest, I just want to have something to be able to respond with and send people, say, hey, this answers your question. So the number one question or one of the two questions that I receive most commonly about this canner is someone will say something like this: I've heard that the USDA doesn't approve electric pressure canners, and I know that you are a safe guideline canner, so why are you using one when it's not considered safe? Question number two is, why in the world did you choose to have an electric canner versus the traditional canners that we have used for hundreds of years? Both of those are very, very good questions, so I want to very quickly address them. Question number one is, the USDA doesn't approve digital pressure canners. Now, that is actually a misunderstanding on the wording of what the USDA does. The USDA does not officially approve any canning equipment. They only officially approve canning methods. They test canning methods, they approve canning methods. They do not go and individually put their stamp of approval on any particular manufacturer of canner. So that is off the table. All canners are not technically have their stamp of approval of the USDA, number one. Number two is, whenever it comes to pressure canning, like in general, and digital pressure canners, I do not trust all pressure canners. Or excuse me, I don't trust all digital pressure canners. There are several popular brands on the market today that market themselves as an all-in-one pressure cooker / pressure canner, and they simply have a button that is a pressure canning function. So it's essentially an Instant Pot, but it has a special pressure canning function that allows it to supposedly pressure can safely. I do not trust that. I do trust a canner that is dedicated only to pressure canning, and that is by Presto. Even if there was another canner dedicated only to Presto, I don't know that I would trust it enough to use it, because those companies haven't been around for hundreds of years. Those companies are not the leading name in pressure canning for decades. Presto is. Presto knows pressure canning. They know canning. And so I trust them to produce a pressure canner that has these safety features, and they have fail safes built into it to where if it doesn't reach the proper temperature, if it doesn't reach the proper pressure, if there is anything wrong in the sequence of events that the canner has to go through, it has fail safes in it that will stop the machine and not allow you to go any further. It will put an error message on the screen. You can look up that error code. I've had this for 2 or 3 years now, and I've never had an error code. So I'm only going by what the manual tells me as far as the error codes go. But it will not let you go any further if it senses if any of those sensors go wrong, if anything is messed up with that. So I trust Presto. I don't necessarily trust the other all-in-one pressure canning pots out there. So I do want to make sure I note that just because I use and love the Presto Digital does not mean I put my stamp of recommendation on all digital canners. So that answers question number 1. Question number 2 is, why do I opt to have an electric canner, period, when the traditional stovetop canners are the tried and true time-tested method? And it's a great question. I highly recommend having a traditional stovetop canner. Not necessarily because it is the traditional tried and true way, although that definitely plays into that, but simply because you don't need electricity to can. If the power goes out, if we're in a grid down situation, if you're in a situation where you just don't have power for a national emergency, a national disaster, just whatever the case may be, even if it's just for a week with a tornado and you've got all this meat in the freezer, like we have, let's say a tornado hit right after we harvested 2 deer, and I've got 2 deer in the freezer and power's not going to be back on for 4 or 5 days, I've got to get to pressure canning. Traditional stovetop pressure canners can be canned outside on a camp propane stove. So that's why I absolutely recommend having one. So all of that said, why do I have this thing? And that is because I have a glass stovetop. Now, I have heard from many people that they use heavy pressure canners on their glass stovetop with absolutely no issue, and I believe them. In fact, I will have one at some point, but when it comes to when I first started pressure canning, I was like, I'm really hesitant to use heavy equipment on this stove because it was only a few years ago that I shattered this exact model of stove. I replaced my old stove with the exact same new stove, which is kind of weird. Like, it shattered. Why would I get the exact same one? But it's because I absolutely love it. I love this stove. So, but I shattered it with a cast iron skillet. And it's not like I, dropped it from 6 feet above. It was like a normal kind of cooking day, and I just was a little bit too rough with it and it shattered. So that experience has gotten me a little wary of trying to can on a glass stove top. So that is why I opted for the digital pressure canner. The other reason I opted for this is because I like to can when I am doing something else, like a long-term project. I like to can while I'm homeschooling. I like to can while I am out in the garden planting or harvesting or pulling weeds or anything like that. I like to can when I have to get the canner set and going while I go and take care of animals or chores around the house, whatever the case may be. And with a traditional stovetop pressure canner, you have to somewhat keep an eye on the jiggler, on the weight, to make sure you have that. Make sure it's called the hula girl. Make sure it's rocking correctly. And sometimes I think you can get into a sweet spot where your stove, your equipment, and exactly what number it needs to be on to keep that steady hula dance going. But especially if you're using a new canner, new stove, or you're just new to canning, it can take some adjusting up and down to get that process right. So it takes a little bit of babysitting throughout the pressure canning process. With the digital pressure canners, at least with the Presto that I can vouch for, it is push button. You just go and it's done. It senses the pressure, the steam. It's got this weight that goes on it. You don't have to monitor the rocking action, all of that is monitored with sensors and mechanisms inside the canning pot, or this part right here. I don't know what to call this. But so that is why I have still chosen to have an electric pressure canner. The concern of my glass stove top and the convenience of push button convenience and the ability to walk away and get other things done while this is going for me in the canner. So all that to say, let's wrap up this video and let you know that I still highly recommend the Presto Digital Canner, but be careful, don't use vinegar in it if you have hard water, or, you know, like I said, I'm still doing it anyway because it's already messed up. It's not going to get messed up any further than it already is, and I prefer to have, it's worth it to me to have clear jars, but you make that judgment call for you. Okay, that's all for today, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye.